My name is Ethan Vale. I'm 28 years old, co-founder of a tech startup that runs half the back-end systems your company depends on. But before any of that, I was just a broke college kid holding my sister's hand at our father's funeral, wondering how the hell I'd keep us alive. At 22, I became her guardian overnight. No mother in the picture, no safety net. Just me, 2 part-time jobs, and a vow I whispered to myself every night: she will never feel alone in this world. Everything I built came from that promise, forged in sleepless nights, overdraft fees, and silent prayers to a God I wasn't sure existed. My name is Ethan Vale. I never cared much for weddings, all that forced small talk, the clinking of glasses, urging strangers to kiss the bright chandeliers, reflecting a happiness you're not sure you believe in. But that day, I stood near the bar in a charcoal suit, tailored to hide how tired I was, swirling the last inch of bourbon in my glass, and watched my little sister float through the crowd like she'd finally become light. She looked beautiful. Not just the kind of beautiful that comes from hairpins and ivory silk, but a beauty born of relief, the relief of a woman who had finally laid down the weight she'd carried since she was 17. The weight I could never let her see was mine too. Then he walked in, Charles Ainsworth, father of the groom. A man whose name was printed on Forbes covers and bronze plaques across half the city. A man who'd spent the last 6 months trying to acquire a tech company his enterprise couldn't function without. My company. And he didn't even know it. His gaze swept over the room with casual entitlement resting on ties, shoes, wristwatches, assessing everyone's value in a glance. Then his eyes slid over me like I was an empty space between living beings. He didn't pause, didn't nod, didn't register me as anything worth acknowledgement. Just kept walking, chatting with a senator's wife about the import tariffs on European steel. His cologne lingered after he passed something sharp and minty that clashed with the smell of bourbon on my breath. And for a second, just a second, I almost laughed. Because it was funny in a cruel, poetic way. This man, so proud of his last name, probably signs it in gold ink, was trying to buy out the very platform I had poured every broken hour of my 20s into. The system that kept his logistics division from collapsing. He thought I was no one. And he was right in a sense. I was no one he knew. No one he respected. No one he thought twice about. But I knew him. I knew how men like him operated. How they skimmed CVs and LinkedIn profiles with the same dismissive flick they used to swat away waitstaff. How they assumed a quiet man was a weak man. And how they believed everything and everyone had a price tag dangling somewhere behind their neck. I sipped my bourbon, feeling the burn bloom down my chest, and watched him greet the board members he'd invited. Watched him laugh too loudly at jokes about market shares and upcoming mergers. Watched him throw back a glass of Pinot with the easy arrogance of someone who'd never worried about an overdraft fee. He didn't know that 15 minutes from now, when my name was called for an impromptu speech, something Lydia must have snuck onto the program without telling me everything about the way he looked at me would change. His posture, his expression, his grip on the wine glass. I could already see it in my mind, the way his brow would twitch when I said my name. The way his lips would part when he realized which company I'd built, the way his shoulders would stiffen as he recalculated everything he thought he knew about me, about this wedding, about his son's marriage. Some people hate surprises. Charles Ainsworth was one of them. And I've always believed life's cruelest poetry is revealed in the moments we least expect it. Like when you're standing in a wedding hall built on old money, staring at a man who thinks he owns the world, and realizing you're about to take something from him that he can never buy back, the knowledge that he underestimated the wrong man. He didn't know the truth. None of them did. Not the bridesmaids in pastel chiffon gossiping near the flower wall. Not the groomsmen half-drunk on vintage champagne talking about fantasy football drafts. Not the aunts and uncles asking Lydia when she'd start having children. They all saw what they wanted to see: a quiet man in an expensive suit, alone by the bar, polite but unremarkable. But the truth was simple and brutal. 6 months ago, Charles Ainsworth sent his top acquisitions lawyer to approach my company. Not with respect, not with partnership, but with the kind of offer that came wrapped in condescension. An offer that read, "Sell to us now before we make you irrelevant." I remember reading his email at 2 a.m., sitting on the floor of my apartment, back against the fridge, because it was the only cool place left in that suffocating summer heat. Lydia was asleep in the next room, her door cracked open so I could hear her if she called out in the night. She never really lost that habit after Dad died, waking up from dreams that felt too real, checking if I was still there. I read Charles's words over and over, feeling nothing at first. Then everything. Anger, yes, but deeper than that, a quiet, resigned contempt. Because men like him didn't see people like me. To him, I was just a name on a cap table. An obstacle to leverage down until it snapped. He didn't know the nights I'd spent building that company from borrowed code and second-hand laptops. The years I worked 2 jobs and coded until dawn, just to keep Lydia in school. He didn't know about the eviction notices I hid from her, or the dinner nights I skipped so she'd have enough. He didn't know that when our father died, we didn't just lose a parent. We lost our roof, our safety, our place in the world. The debts were endless. Our mother was long gone. Lydia was 17 and I was 22, and there was no one else. I became her guardian overnight. Her brother, her father, her everything. Charles Ainsworth didn't see that. He saw a titleless nobody, a minor shareholder standing between him and his next quarterly brag. That was fine by me, because while he spent his days sharpening leverage strategies in glass conference rooms, I spent mine building systems that made his entire logistics arm run smoother. While he called my co-founder Noah with smug questions about valuation caps, I was the one rewriting our back-end code to handle triple the load alone in my kitchen. At midnight, a cold cup of instant coffee going stale beside my keyboard. He thought he was hunting small game. He didn't realize he was standing on someone else's battlefield. And what he never understood, what men like him never understand, is that the strongest man in the room isn't always the loudest. It isn't the man with the biggest paycheck or the flashiest last name. Sometimes it's the one who learned to survive in silence. The one who learned how to bend without breaking, how to lose everything, and build it all again with his bare hands. The one who never needed to be seen to know his worth. So when he brushed past me that day, eyes skimming over my face like I was part of the wallpaper, I didn't flinch. I didn't clear my throat to introduce myself. I didn't force my presence into his awareness. Because I knew the truth. I knew who I was. And soon enough, so would he. I remember the call. It came on a Tuesday morning in April, right before dawn. My phone buzzed against the chipped nightstand. For a split second, half asleep, I thought it was my alarm for the early shift at the campus cafe. But then I saw the caller ID Dr. Porter, my faculty advisor. My chest tightened before I even answered. Calls at 5 a.m. are never good news. "Ethan," she said, her voice soft but edged with urgency. "There's been an accident." The room seemed to go silent. Even the hum of the old radiator faded out. I sat up, the sheets pooling at my waist, and waited for her to say it, the words I'd never wanted to hear. "Your father, he didn't make it." Didn't make it. Like he was just late to something. Like death was a meeting he missed. I hung up without remembering what I said. I sat there on that narrow dorm bed staring at the cracked paint on the wall until the rising sun burned through the blinds, and I realized I couldn't feel my hands. The next 12 hours blurred, packing, calling Lydia's school to get her out of class, calling the funeral home, calling who else was left to call our mother was gone. She'd left years before to reinvent herself in someone else's life, with someone else's children. It was just me and Lydia now. When I pulled into the driveway of our old house, Lydia was sitting on the front steps with her backpack hugged to her chest. Her face was blotchy and red from crying, but when she saw me, she ran down and threw her arms around my waist so hard I nearly fell backwards. "He was supposed to come to my graduation next week," she sobbed into my shirt. I whispered, smoothing her hair, feeling the cracks in my chest widen. I know, Lyd. We buried him 3 days later. The funeral was a blur of raincoats, umbrellas, and the smell of wet earth. People I barely knew hugged me and said things like, "Stay strong for your sister," as if I had any other choice. But after the last condolence casserole had been dropped off and the door finally clicked shut behind the final guest, the truth came crashing down around us. Debt. So much debt. Credit cards, unpaid business loans, late mortgage notices stacked in a drawer I never knew existed. Our father had been self-employed, running his woodworking shop with pride. Somewhere along the line, his payments must have slipped. He must have been shielding us from it until the end. But death is merciless. Once the obituary printed, the creditors came knocking. They took the house. They took the truck. They took everything except the suitcase I'd packed for spring break. That night, Lydia sat curled up on the living room floor, knees tucked into her oversized hoodie, tears streaking down her cheeks. The moonlight filtered through the empty windows onto the dust swirling at our feet. She looked at me, eyes red and broken, and whispered, "What do we do now, Ethan?" I remember feeling something settle deep in my bones, then something heavy and permanent. I knew no one else was coming. No aunts or uncles, no mother, no one. It was just us, 2 orphans, 1 rusted sedan, and a future that had crumbled overnight. So I made a decision. I would finish school, I would get a job, any job, and I would keep her safe no matter what it cost me. I didn't know it back then, but that was the moment everything in my life shifted. The moment boyhood ended. The moment I stopped dreaming for myself and started fighting for her instead. The funeral ended, but reality didn't. 2 days after we laid him to rest, I sat at the kitchen table with stacks of unopened envelopes spread before me. Lydia was asleep on the couch, wrapped in an old quilt that still smelled like our father's workshop sawdust and cedar oil. Each letter was a death knell of its own. Final notice. Overdue payment. Intent to foreclose. I remember staring at them until the words blurred. My father had been drowning for years, and we never knew. He'd kept it hidden behind tired smiles and half-finished stories about the jobs he was about to land. He must have thought he could fix it before we found out. But time ran out on him the way it runs out on all of us. Within weeks, the house was gone. The truck repossessed. His workshop cleared out, tools auctioned off to strangers. On our last night there, I walked from room to room, memorizing the scuffs on the hardwood floors, the squeaky cabinet hinge in the kitchen, the faint pencil marks on the door frame where Dad used to measure Lydia's height every birthday. She followed me in silence, clutching a small duffel bag stuffed with clothes and the pressed white dress she'd planned to wear for graduation. Her acceptance letter to college peeked from the zipper. She looked up at me with eyes swollen from crying and whispered, "Where will we go?" I didn't have an answer. My scholarship covered tuition, but I couldn't house her in a dorm. She was still in high school, and we had no one else. The next morning, we loaded what little we had into my beat-up Honda Civic and drove away before the bank's repo team arrived. I watched the rearview mirror until our house disappeared behind a curve of maple trees. Lydia pressed her forehead to the window, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. I found us a cheap motel near campus, $20 a night mold in the corners of the bathroom ceiling, the smell of stale cigarette smoke embedded in the wallpaper. Lydia curled up on one of the twin beds, hugging her backpack to her chest, like it was a life vest. That first night after she fell asleep, I sat in the cracked vinyl desk chair, staring out at the flickering neon sign that buzzed outside our window. Vacancy, vacancy, vacancy. I remember thinking, this is it. This is where we landed. I felt so tired it hurt to breathe. My bones ached with exhaustion and fear. I knew what people said about kids like us, kids who fell out of middle-class safety nets and vanished into poverty. They said we didn't try hard enough. They said we made bad choices. They said we were destined to fail. Maybe they were right. But looking at Lydia's sleeping face under the dim motel lamp, I knew one thing. Failure wasn't an option. Not for her. So I swallowed my grief, my anger, my shame. I pushed them down so deep they burned my chest. And I told myself over and over like a prayer I didn't believe in. You don't get to break. You don't get to fall apart. Not now. Not ever. Because this wasn't about me anymore. It never would be again. I don't remember sleeping that night. I just remember staring at the water stain blooming across the motel ceiling like a dark, spreading bruise. Lydia's breathing was slow and uneven, her shoulders trembling even in sleep. I could tell she'd cried herself dry. Outside, trucks rumbled down the highway. Neon light from the motel sign flickered against the thin curtains. Vacancy, vacancy, vacancy. The world felt so empty and so loud. My phone lay face down on the nightstand, silent. I'd stopped checking it hours ago. No one was coming. No miracle calls. No long-lost relatives with open arms. No friends with spare rooms. People had their own lives, their own bills, their own grief to carry. Ours was ours alone. I leaned forward in the chair, elbows on my knees, head in my hands. For the first time since Dad died, I let myself feel it. All of it. The fear, the rage, the bone-deep exhaustion that made my hands shake. I thought about what would happen next. Finals were in 2 weeks. My scholarship covered tuition, but not food, not rent, not Lydia's senior dues or cap and gown or prom. I had $217 in my checking account, a half tank of gas, and nowhere to go after this motel bill was due on Friday. The darkness pressed in on me from all sides. My chest felt like it might cave in, like grief was an animal gnawing through my ribs to make room for itself. I thought about Dad's workshop, about the smell of cedar and glue, about his rough hands guiding mine when I was little, teaching me how to sand down splinters until the wood felt like silk. He'd tried so hard to protect us, to build something for us, but he failed. And now it was my turn. I looked at Lydia sleeping under that cheap motel blanket. Her hair spread out across the pillow like spilled ink. Her cheeks still streaked with tears. She looked so small, so breakable. I remembered the day she was born, Dad placing her in my 5-year-old arms, whispering, "She's your sister, Ethan. She'll always need you." He was right, and now he was gone. So it was just me. In that moment, something inside me shifted, clicked into place with a quiet, terrible certainty. Grief receded like a tide replaced by something sharper, colder, stronger. I whispered into the dark, the vow tasting like blood and iron on my tongue. "I'll take care of you, Lyd. I don't care what it costs me. I said it again, louder this time, like an incantation. I'll take care of you. I swear to God, I'll take care of you. It didn't matter if I had to drop out and work 2 jobs. It didn't matter if I never slept again. If I lost every friend, every relationship, every chance at my own life, she would not fall. Not while I was still breathing. I didn't pray often. Not after Mom left. Not after Dad's debts came due. But that night I prayed. Not for help. Not for rescue. But for the strength to do what needed to be done. I prayed for a heart made of iron. For lungs that wouldn't give out no matter how long I ran. For a spine that wouldn't break under the weight. Because if life was going to make me the villain in my own story, then so be it. I'd become whatever I had to be to keep her safe. A ghost, a machine, a silent blade in the dark. As the first pale light of dawn bled through the curtains, I stood and stretched the knots out of my back. My whole body ached, but my mind was clear, sharp, focused. I watched Lydia stir her eyelids fluttering open. She looked up at me with that small, shattered hope only the young can still muster after devastation. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice cracking. "What do we do now?" I bent down and brushed her hair off her forehead, forced a smile that felt heavy on my lips. Now I said quietly, "We survive." And from that moment on, everything I did, every choice, every sacrifice, every scar was made in service of that vow. To protect her. To keep her dreams alive even if mine died along the way. The grind started the next morning. I woke before Lydia slipped out of the motel room and sat in my car with the engine off to save gas. The sun was just cresting over the empty strip malls across the highway, painting everything in washed-out gold. I opened my phone, searched for jobs within walking distance, and wrote them down in a battered notebook Dad had once used to track lumber orders, campus cafe morning shifts, loading dock overnight stocking, courier runs evenings and weekends, minimum wage, no benefits, no dignity required. By 8 a.m., I'd applied to all of them. By noon, I was washing dishes in the back of the student cafe, hot water scalding my hands, grease clinging under my nails, no matter how hard I scrubbed. Between lunch rushes, I sat in the supply closet reading microeconomics chapters under a flickering fluorescent bulb, memorizing formulas with the smell of burnt coffee in my lungs. After my shift ended, I ran to class, sweat drying cold on my back, as I slipped into the lecture hall just as the professor flipped to the next slide. I took notes with trembling hands. Every word felt heavy, like my brain was wading through molasses, but I forced myself to focus. Grades meant scholarship. Scholarship meant school. School meant I could stay close to Lydia. At night, I picked up courier shifts, hauling boxes up 4 flights of stairs in crumbling apartment buildings, tip money stuffed into my back pocket for gas and motel bills. By the time I crawled back to our room, Lydia would already be asleep. Her homework spread across the second bed, highlighted notes glowing under the cheap desk lamp. I'd stand in the doorway for a moment, just watching her, making sure she was still breathing, making sure she was still here. Then I'd shower the day off me in water that never stayed hot long enough, collapse onto the thin mattress, and set my alarm for 4:30 a.m. I slept 4 hours a night, sometimes 3. My muscles felt like they were turning to stone. I'd wake up with my fingers curled into claws from gripping boxes and scrub brushes for hours. My eyes burned constantly red veins spiderwebbing across the whites. People around me talked about internships, ski trips, music festivals. They complained about cafeteria food and professors who graded too hard. I listened silent. I envied them, hated them, loved them. Because their lives were simple in ways mine would never be again. Somewhere along the way, I lost my girlfriend. Her name was Maya. She was kind, funny. She'd leave coffee at my door before early shifts and send me dumb memes at 2 a.m. when I was studying. But after weeks of unanswered texts and canceled dates, she showed up at the cafe one morning, tears brimming in her eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, "I can't keep doing this. I feel like I'm dating a ghost." I nodded, didn't beg, didn't explain, just kissed her forehead and let her walk away. Not because I didn't care, but because I didn't have enough of myself left to give. Survival consumed every last drop. They say hardship builds character like it's some neat, polished, processed sandpaper smoothing out edges to reveal something noble. But that's a lie. My character was built from overdraft fees and roach-infested motel rooms, from walking to class still damp with sweat from an overnight shift, from hunger so sharp it made my hands shake during exams, but every dollar I earned stretched across 2 mouths. Every day I stayed upright was another day Lydia didn't have to worry about where she'd sleep or what she'd eat. Sometimes at 3 in the morning when I was hauling crates in the dark, I'd imagine a different life. One where Dad was still alive. One where Lydia got to be 17 without the shadows of unpaid bills looming over her head. One where I got to be 22, stupid and reckless and selfish. But then I'd shake the thoughts away. Because regret doesn't pay rent. Dreams don't buy groceries, and hope is a luxury for people with safety nets. So I kept moving, kept grinding, kept burning myself down to keep her warm. I told myself it would end eventually. That someday, somehow, the grind would give way to something better. I didn't know when. I didn't know how. I just knew quitting wasn't an option. Not while Lydia still needed me. Not while my promise still bound me to this earth like iron shackles. Not while there was work left to do. Graduation came and went like a passing storm. There was no cap toss for me. No photos with friends in front of ivy-covered walls. No champagne bottles popped on city rooftops. Instead, there was a quiet sigh as I stood alone in my rented gown diploma clutched in my hand, staring out at the sea of families cheering in the stands. Somewhere in that crowd, Lydia was waving at me, her smile bright and tearful, like she could see a future in me I couldn't see in myself. After the ceremony, while my classmates hugged their parents and posed for pictures destined for Facebook timelines, I returned my gown, folded my honor cords into my backpack, and walked out into the heavy summer heat. My phone buzzed with a voicemail from a hiring manager at a mid-sized logistics firm. Back-end operations. Salary wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. Steady meant rent. Rent meant Lydia had a roof. I took the job without hesitation, moved us out of the motel into a modest 1-bedroom apartment near a freeway exit. Lydia got the bedroom. I took the couch. She argued at first, but I refused to budge. At night, she studied for her community college classes, while I cooked dinner, usually rice and eggs, sometimes pasta, if overtime was good that week. Weekends were for laundry errands, catching up on sleep, and the unglamorous rituals that keep 2 people alive on a razor-thin budget. But somewhere in that quiet grind, something inside me refused to die. I started taking online courses again. Marketing, automation systems, SAS platforms, anything that might sharpen my skills. My coworkers laughed when they saw me eating lunch alone in the break room, eyes glued to a lecture on inventory optimization. But I didn't care. I knew opportunity didn't knock twice. Sometimes it didn't knock at all. You had to build the damn door yourself. Most nights after Lydia went to sleep, I sat at the cheap folding table we used as a dining desk laptop, humming under my fingertips. The glow of the screen illuminating unpaid bills tacked to the corkboard above. I didn't know what I was aiming for yet. I just knew I couldn't stay where I was forever. One evening after another 10-hour shift, spent resolving inventory discrepancies and chasing down missing shipments, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bus window. The city lights blurred behind me, streaks of white and gold. I looked tired, older than my age, but there was something new in my eyes, a flicker of hunger I thought I'd lost the night Dad died. That was the first step forward, not a breakthrough, not a miracle. Just the quiet decision to keep sharpening my edge even if no one was watching. Especially if no one was watching. Because someday, somehow, I knew I'd need it. And when that day came, I refused to stand there empty-handed begging life for scraps. I would be ready, even if I had to build my future one exhausted night at a time. Opportunity didn't come like I expected. No angel chorus. No motivational TED Talk moment. Just an ordinary Thursday night, the kind that smells like burnt pasta and fluorescent lights. I was sitting on the couch, still in my work slacks and sweat-stained dress shirt, shoes kicked off and collar unbuttoned, eating leftover pasta straight from the plastic container. Lydia's laughter floated out from her room, where she sat cross-legged on her bed with a laptop propped on a pile of textbooks, video calling her study group. Her voice was bright, easy, alive in a way I'd spent years fighting to protect. I let her laughter wash over me, closing my eyes for a second. That sound made every graveyard shift worth it. Every roach-infested motel room. Every cold dinner eaten standing at a workbench. Then my phone buzzed on the coffee table. Once. Twice. I ignored it at first, too tired to care. But it buzzed again, persistent, vibrating against the chipped wood like a small mechanical heartbeat. With a sigh, I set the fork down, wiped my hand on my pants, and checked. It was an email. From Noah Ruiz. We hadn't spoken in over a year. Subject line, need your brain on something. My heart gave a small, involuntary kick. I opened it. Hey, Ethan, I know you're probably slammed, but Felix and I are building something new. A SaaS platform for back-end automation, streamlined invoicing, inventory processing, predictive logistics. We're drowning in code and client outreach. I remember how your mind works, how you see gaps and systems no one else notices. We need someone who can handle operations and pitch to early clients. No funding yet. Just borrowed server space, 2 busted laptops, and too much coffee. But it feels alive. Let me know if you're interested. No hard feelings if you're not. Noah. I sat there reading it over and over. The TV droned in the background, muted commercials flickering across the dusty screen. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and microwaved garlic. Alive. That word caught in my chest like a thorn. For years, I'd been a man defined by necessity. Wake up, work, study, work again, sleep 4 hours, repeat. There was no space for risk, for reckless hope, for anything that might endanger the fragile stability I'd built for Lydia. But reading Noah's words, I felt something dangerous begin to stir. A memory of the boy I used to be, the boy who dreamed of building things that lasted, who believed his brain was his way out. The boy who coded his first inventory app at 15 to help Dad track lumber stock, thinking he could save the family business one day. That boy was buried under overdraft notices and graveyard shifts. But he wasn't dead. Not completely. I thought about Lydia. About the rent due next week. About the bills stacked on the corner of the table held down by a chipped ceramic mug. About her college tuition payment that would clear out half my checking account tomorrow morning. Then I thought about the last time I felt alive. I couldn't remember. Not really. Survival doesn't leave room for feeling alive. It only leaves room for endurance. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly. Fear surged up, thick and acidic. What if I failed? What if this risk cost us everything I'd clawed back from nothing? What if? Then I remembered the motel ceiling, the flickering neon vacancy sign outside our window, Lydia's voice asking, "What do we do now?" and my own voice steady despite the tremor in my bones answering, "Now we survive." We'd survived. Now maybe it was time to try living. I typed out my reply before I could overthink. "I'm in." I hit send and sat there staring at the sent confirmation. My chest felt tight, like something enormous was pressing against my ribs from the inside. A mix of terror and possibility. That night after Lydia fell asleep, I lay awake on the lumpy couch, staring at the shadows dancing across the ceiling from the streetlight outside. My mind buzzed with plans, anxieties, half-finished ideas. Fear was still there, heavy and real. But for the first time in years, it wasn't the only thing I felt. There was something else. Something I almost didn't recognize at first. Hope. Sharp. Dangerous. Alive. I knew this choice would split my life in two. From 8 to 5, I'd still wear slacks and answer to middle managers. But from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., I'd build something that might actually matter. I didn't know if I was making the right decision. Hell, I didn't know if I even deserved a chance like this. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I was done standing still. Done surviving in silence. Because the grind had built me into a man who could endure anything. Now it was time to see what else that man could become. My life split in two after that night. From 8 to 5, I was Ethan Vale, operations analyst in pressed slacks and scuffed Oxfords, shuffling between spreadsheets and vendor calls under the flickering fluorescence of a cubicle farm. I kept my head down, smiled when spoken to, left precisely at 5:30. My life was measured in Outlook calendar blocks and stale coffee breaks, a monotony so numbing it almost felt safe. But from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m., I became someone else entirely. I was Ethan, co-founder of a fledgling tech startup. My laptop glowed like a forge in the dark kitchen, illuminating empty ramen cups and old utility bills scattered across the table. Noah and Felix worked beside me through Slack calls and Google Docs, their voices scratchy with cheap headphone mics. I listened to their caffeine highs spike and crash in real time, their jokes getting sloppier, their laughter sharper as the night deepened. We built from nothing. Borrowed server space. Free tier API credits. Felix's girlfriend's spare living room router balanced on a tower of textbooks. Some nights we argued over UI design until 2 in the morning, whisper yelling so we didn't wake Lydia. Other nights, silence stretched between us, broken only by the clack of keys and the occasional hissed curse when a test failed. The glow of our screens was the only proof we were still awake, still fighting. Money was tight. Tighter than tight. Every paycheck from my day job went to rent, groceries, and Lydia's tuition. Startup funds came from what was left, $50 here, $70 there. Just enough for minimal hosting and takeout coffee to keep our synapses from collapsing at 1 a.m. 6 months in, one of our co-founders quit. He couldn't handle the instability, the risk, the gnawing anxiety of wondering if this was all just a stupid fever dream. That night, Felix and I sat on a video call, staring at each other through pixelated screens. His dark hair hung limp over tired eyes. My own eyes burned bloodshot from another 20-hour day. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Felix sighed. "We're going to keep going, right?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "Yeah, we're going to keep going." And then came the breakthrough. One of our cold outreach emails landed with a mid-sized corporate logistics firm. Their back-end processes were a nightmare, outdated invoicing software, manual data entry bottlenecks, hours wasted each week. We pitched them on piloting our tool for 2 weeks. Just 2 weeks. On the fourth day, their processing time dropped by 40%. 40%. They emailed us at midnight on a Thursday. Subject line: "Can we talk tomorrow?" Felix and I stared at the screen, pulses thudding so loud it felt like our eardrums might burst. The next morning, I took their call during my lunch break. Sitting alone in my car suit jacket slung over the passenger seat, salad untouched in my lap, I clenched my hands to stop them from trembling as their operations director said, "We want to license you for the quarter. Can you onboard by Monday?" I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled into my phone camera and said, "Absolutely. I'll send the contract over by end of day." After that word spread like wildfire. They told 2 other companies in their network. Those 2 told 3 more. Suddenly, our inboxes were flooding with demo requests. Companies wanted onboarding calls, integration guides, custom features. My nights vanished into code sprints, customer support tickets, pitch deck edits, and invoice drafting. Every time I shut my laptop at 2 a.m., my body felt like lead, but my mind burned electric. Then came the review. A mid-tier tech blog picked up our story, "2 young founders revolutionize back-end automation for SMEs." It wasn't TechCrunch, but it was enough. Enough to get us on the radar of VCs, enough to triple our demo requests overnight. Noah and Felix celebrated by splitting a 6-pack on their apartment rooftop. I didn't join them. I was too busy finalizing a new deployment patch to fix a minor data rendering bug before Monday's onboarding. Because even in success, fear stayed with me. Fear that it would all crumble again. That one overlooked bug or failed integration would bring everything crashing down. I'd learned too early how fragile stability was. I wasn't going to let Lydia taste hope only to rip it away from her again. So I saved every spare cent, kept my day job, ate rice and eggs 5 nights a week, responded to customer service tickets on my lunch breaks, and debugged code until my eyes burned red. But under the fear, something else bloomed. Pride. For the first time in years, I felt it fully. We had built something real, something that mattered. Something that proved I wasn't just the guy scraping by to survive. I was a builder, a creator, a man who could rise from nothing and make the world a little smoother, a little faster, a little better. And for the first time, I let myself believe maybe there's more for me out there than just surviving. Maybe I was meant to rise. I thought life would finally settle into a rhythm: work, startup, Lydia, repeat. It wasn't easy, but it was predictable, and predictable felt like peace to me. Then one Tuesday night, everything shifted. I had just collapsed onto the couch, still in my work slacks, eating cold leftover rice straight from the container, when Lydia's door creaked open. She peeked out with eyes shining in a way that immediately set off alarms in my chest. Her voice was almost breathless as she asked if we could talk. I set down my fork, noting the tremble in her tone. Fear, excitement, both. She stepped out, wringing her hands in the hem of her oversized sweatshirt, before blurting out that she had something to tell me. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe she got a scholarship offer. Maybe she wanted to transfer schools, until she took a shaky breath and said she was getting married. The words punched the air out of my lungs. I managed to ask her what she meant, and she rushed on, explaining that it was to Nathan Ainsworth. They'd been seeing each other seriously for a while now, and she hadn't told me because she didn't know how. The name rang familiar, like a warning bell tolling in the dark. I remembered meeting him once in passing. Tall, polite, and easy smile. The kind of guy who brought flowers on a second date. But I never thought it was serious. I asked if this was what she wanted. Tears welled in her eyes as she nodded, saying she was happy, really happy that he was good to her. That word happy cracked something open in my chest. I swallowed down every protective instinct screaming at me to tell her to slow down, think twice, don't trust so easily. Because her happiness was the one thing I'd spent my entire adult life fighting for. I asked when I would meet him properly, and her shoulders sagged with relief as she told me he wanted to meet me too, suggesting dinner that Friday. I told her it would be here and I would cook. Friday came. I cleaned the apartment top to bottom, cooked Lydia's favorite garlic lemon chicken, and tried not to overthink every detail. At exactly 6:45 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Nathan stood there, flowers in one hand, wine in the other, wearing a crisp navy suit and a grin that tried a little too hard. I shook his hand, noting the firm grip, the expensive watch peeking from under his cuff, the faint scent of designer cologne clinging to him. Dinner was polite. We talked about college football, his law school classes, how he and Lydia met. He was charming, respectful, clearly adoring her. But with every word he spoke, something tugged at my mind, a familiarity I couldn't place until it clicked. When he excused himself to the bathroom, I turned to Lydia and asked slowly if he was any relation to Charles Ainsworth. She froze fork halfway to her mouth before whispering that yes, that was his father, and asking softly why I wanted to know. For a moment the room seemed to tilt. My chest tightened with the realization. Charles Ainsworth, the same man who had spent months trying to acquire my company, offering condescending buyouts, wrapped in polite threats. A man who dismissed founders like me as stepping stones on his way to empire. And now he was about to become family. Nathan returned oblivious to the war raging inside my mind and reached for Lydia's hand under the table, brushing his thumb over her knuckles with easy affection. She smiled at him, radiant in a way I hadn't seen since before Dad died. Something inside me settled then, heavy, resigned, but resolute. If this man loved her, truly loved her, then his father's shadow was irrelevant. My priority was and always would be Lydia, not business, not ego, not revenge. Later that night, as I scrubbed plates in the kitchen, Lydia slipped her arms around my waist and pressed her cheek against my back, whispering that I'd gone quiet for a while and asking if everything was okay. I turned, drying my hands, and studied her face, so young, so hopeful, so sure, before asking if he was good to her. She nodded, saying he was kind, steady, that he listened. I kissed her forehead softly and told her that was enough for me. But as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling with exhaustion thrumming through my bones and quiet acceptance settling over my chest, one thought burned through it all like a live wire. Charles Ainsworth doesn't know who I am, but soon he will. I didn't plan to speak at the wedding. That morning, I helped Lydia pin her veil into place. My hands shook as I smoothed the satin over her shoulders, but I kept my smile steady. She looked up at me through the mirror with eyes shimmering from unshed tears and whispered her thanks for everything I had done. My throat tightened as I kissed her temple and stepped back, memorizing her face radiant, not because of the dress or makeup, but because she was finally free to live the life I'd fought for her to have. The ceremony was beautiful. Soft piano music curled through the air as white roses cascaded down wooden arches. Nathan's eyes never left hers, locked on her, as if she was the only person in the world. For a moment, I let myself breathe. Let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the happy ending we both deserved. Then came the reception. The ballroom was a cathedral of chandeliers and polished marble floors, with waitstaff in black vests, moving like silent shadows between tables. Guests mingled with glasses of champagne, their laughter a quiet gilded hum. I stayed near the back content to watch content to remain unseen. But then a woman in catering black tapped my shoulder, and told me I was up in 2 minutes. I blinked in confusion, asking for what, and she gestured towards the stage with a smile, saying my speech was next. My stomach dropped. I hadn't prepared anything. There was no note in the program. Lydia must have added me without telling me. I glanced across the room to see her laughing with her bridesmaids, blissfully unaware of the panic rising in my chest. I could have declined. Should have, maybe. But then my gaze fell on Charles Ainsworth standing near the head table, swirling his wine as his too loud laughter rose among a group of men in sharp suits. He hadn't spoken to me all night, hadn't even acknowledged my existence. Something inside me hardened. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and walked onto the stage. The room fell quiet as I took the mic, crystal glasses pausing mid-air, forks stilled on porcelain plates. I cleared my throat, feeling my voice remain steady despite the adrenaline pounding through my veins, and introduced myself as Lydia's brother. A ripple moved through the crowd as guests nodded politely or tilted their heads with curiosity. Charles looked up, then mild irritation flickering in his eyes at the interruption. I continued explaining that I wasn't just her brother growing up. After our father passed unexpectedly, I became her guardian. I told them how I was 22 and she was 17 with no other family, because our mother had left years before. Silence spread like ink in water. Glasses lowered. Conversations died. Even the string quartet paused between songs to listen. I spoke of how I was finishing college when it happened, how I couldn't afford to fall apart when she needed food, a roof tuition. I told them I worked day shifts, night shifts, weekends, slept less than I'd like to admit, lost friends, and lost someone I loved. I glanced at Lydia then, and tears streamed freely down her cheeks. But we made it, I said softly. She made it because she was brilliant and brave and had a heart that forgave me for all the moments I wasn't enough. I took a deep breath, feeling the words gather in my chest like a tide, and let my gaze drift across the crowd until it found Charles. He was watching me now, his expression unreadable. I added that during those years of trying to survive, I had helped build a startup, a software platform, one that some of them may even use. A murmur spread through the room. Heads turned and people exchanged glances while Charles's posture stiffened almost imperceptibly. I told them how Felix, my co-founder, had joined me on that leap of faith, how we started with borrowed code and busted laptops, and how now we supported some of the biggest firms in the country. I let that truth hang in the air, watching realization dawn across Charles's face, the flicker of confusion, then recognition, then something colder, calculation. But I reminded them I hadn't come to talk business, only to share it as part of our story, the story that led me here to this moment, watching the strongest person I know begin a new life. I turned to Lydia and Nathan, letting my voice soften as I told them I was proud that they had found something rare: trust, partnership, joy, and that I was honored to stand there and tell them they were ready. Applause erupted, then warm and genuine, echoing off marble columns. I stepped down from the stage, exhaling shakily as adrenaline still buzzed in my veins. I didn't get far before Charles intercepted me, moving with that quiet, predatory grace of men used to owning every room they entered. He extended his hand, his smile tight as he addressed me by name and told me it was quite a speech. I shook his hand firm, but not eager, thanked him, and watched as his eyes narrowed, calculation flickering behind them, as he asked if I was the co-founder of the company he'd been trying to acquire. I nodded, confirming it, watching as his smile faltered just slightly, while he admitted he'd had no idea, and asked why I hadn't said anything when we met. I held his gaze, my voice quiet, but edged with steel, and told him it was because I wanted him to see who I was when he thought I was nobody. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. I gave him a polite smile and stepped past him back toward Felix, who grinned like a madman as I approached. We clinked glasses and the tension dissolved. For the rest of the night, I watched Lydia dance under crystal chandeliers, her laughter ringing clear and bright. And for the first time in my life, I let myself feel it. Not victory, not revenge, but peace. We never sold the company to Charles Ainsworth. Not out of spite, not even because of how he treated me. The truth is, his offers were impressive on paper, numbers so large they looked almost fictional. Enough to buy back every sleepless night I spent coding in a roach-infested motel room, every hour I skipped meals, so Lydia could have seconds, every overdraft fee that still haunts me like phantom pain when I check my balance at midnight. But I'd learned to look beyond numbers. His interest wasn't built on respect. It was built on assumption, the assumption that everything and everyone had a price. That dignity was a commodity to be negotiated. That value was determined by who you could outmaneuver, not who you could lift up. People like him don't build legacies, they build leverage. And I had spent too long fighting to build something real, to let it become just another asset on someone else's balance sheet. So we stayed independent. Felix and I scaled with purpose, not greed. We hired slowly, never bloated the team, just to look impressive on TechCrunch. We treated clients like partners, never like prospects to exploit. We didn't promise tenfold growth in 6 months. We promised stability, adaptability, quiet excellence. We didn't need a buyout. We needed space to grow on our terms, to remain something we were proud to put our names on. Ironically, Ainsworth Logistics still licenses our platform. Every month, his employees log in to the same customer portal as everyone else, file their support tickets, request upgrades, and integrate our APIs into their aging systems. We respond quickly, professionally, always polite, never personal. Strictly business. I wonder sometimes if he knows that the maintenance fees he begrudges paying are what funded Lydia's grad school tuition. That every quarterly renewal he signs off on keeps the lights on in the art classrooms where she teaches now. Nathan never brought it up. He respects boundaries. More importantly, he respects Lydia. Over time, we've built something close to trust. He is not his father. He never was. And Lydia, she's thriving. She teaches art at the local high school, staying late to help kids with portfolio applications. She gardens on weekends, coaxing life out of tired soil. She volunteers at the women's shelter twice a month, teaching drawing classes and repainting battered walls. She smiles in a way she never did when we were younger, a soft, unburdened smile that says, "I am safe now." That smile is what I fought for. That's the return on my investment. Not stocks or equity or a portfolio exit, just that smile. Sometimes people still underestimate me. They see the quiet man in the background, the one who stays after meetings to clean up coffee cups, the one who wears old sneakers to boardrooms because he walks to clear his mind, the one who doesn't post selfies with CEOs or brag about metrics on LinkedIn. They see invisibility as weakness. They don't understand its power. Because the truth is, the ones who dismiss you when you're silent are the same ones who scramble to respect you once someone announces your title. But by then, their respect means nothing to me. True respect shows up when no one is watching. It's not a reaction, it's a choice. Charles Ainsworth's biggest mistake wasn't underestimating me. It was assuming that being unseen meant being unimportant. But I've never needed the spotlight. I never wanted to be the loudest voice in the room or the name etched on a headquarters plaque. All I ever needed was to know that Lydia would be okay. And now she is. That's more than enough for me. Winter came soft and early that year. Snow drifted down in silent sheets outside my office window, blanketing the city in a fragile stillness I hadn't felt in years. Everything looked clean, untouched, as if the world had pressed pause and exhaled. Inside, the radiator clicked and hummed against the draft, seeping through old window frames, and for a moment I watched my breath bloom white in the cold. Business was good. Clients paid on time. Our system scaled smoothly, running integrations overnight, without a single failed deployment. Lydia sent me photos of her first ceramics class students holding up wobbly bowls glazed in uneven cobalt and moss green, their faces glowing with the kind of unfiltered pride only children possess. Felix was deep in negotiations for a new regional contract, one that could triple our revenue next quarter if we landed it. Numbers looked solid, projections even better. Everything was fine. But inside I felt hollow, like I'd spent so many years pouring myself out that I'd forgotten how to refill. Most nights I sat alone in the apartment eating reheated curry over the sink while condensation gathered on the window glass. The street below blurred into streaks of sodium yellow and traffic red as cars passed their lights reflecting off the snow like restless ghosts. Success hadn't filled the spaces loss had carved into me. Money didn't warm a bed in winter. Growth metrics didn't soften memories of peeling motel ceilings and silent grief that clung like damp clothes against my skin. Some nights I lay in bed staring up at the cracked paint, waiting for the panic to come, wondering if the next email notification would be the beginning of the end. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the black mirror of my powered-down laptop, saw the lines etched deeper around my mouth, the shadows gone permanent under my eyes. I looked like a man made of iron and ash, forged by necessity, hardened by duty, left empty when the war was over. I didn't know what healing was. I didn't even know if I wanted it. Peace felt like a threat to my vigilance. Like if I let myself rest even for a moment, everything would collapse again. Safety was an illusion I couldn't afford to believe in. And then she arrived. It wasn't dramatic, no cinematic entrance under golden spotlights. Just a knock on the glass door of my co-working booth one evening, long after the office lights had dimmed to motion sensor gloom. She stood there in a wool coat too thin for December, her dark hair tucked into a messy bun, eyes wide and searching in the half-light. "Sorry," she said, her breath misting between us as she cracked the door open. "Are you Ethan Vale?" Her voice was soft, melodic in a way that made my chest tighten around old ghosts. I nodded my mind, already scanning for context. New client, vendor, recruiter. But before I could ask, she stepped fully inside, closing the cold out behind her. "I'm Leah," she said simply, offering her hand. "I think you knew my brother." For a moment, everything in me stilled. The radiator clicked. The snow fell. My pulse thrummed like thunder in the silence between us. I didn't know it then, but in that quiet, unremarkable moment, winter cracked open to let something bloom. Something messy and human. Something dangerously close to hope. Her name was Grace Lynn. She joined our team as a UX consultant brought in by Felix to optimize client onboarding flows. On her first day, she walked into the co-working space in a dark green wool coat. Her hair twisted up with a brass clip, stray wisps curling against her neck. Her eyes moved over every screen and whiteboard with calm precision, as if cataloging the entire room before she even set down her bag. When she reached me, she extended her hand without hesitation. Her grip was firm, confident, and her touch was warm, grounding in a way that made my chest tighten with something I couldn't name. She met my gaze directly, unflinching, her dark eyes clear and focused. "Ethan Vale," she said, nodding slightly like she already knew who I was. "I've read your back-end architecture notes. Clean work? Efficient?" Her voice was low, melodic, without softness. The compliment startled me. Most people tiptoed around me, the silent co-founder with unspoken shadows, the man they respected, but never really saw.